The fleet limped back into position under skies the color of bruised iron. Smoke still clung to the horizon, drifting reminders of ships dragged into the depths. Men whispered in fragments, too shaken to speak openly of what they had seen, though the memory of the colossal tentacles and the abyssal eye haunted them all. Commander Henrik Ulstad stood at the center of it, arms folded, uniform torn and stained but his will unbroken. His face was carved into resolve, though behind his eyes lingered a shadow of doubt. He had always believed that force could subdue any threat, that steel and fire would triumph over the unknown. Yet the Kraken's deliberate retreat gnawed at him. It had not been defeated. It had chosen to let them live. To a soldier, mercy was more terrifying than violence. Dr. Elias Vargon felt the weight of that mercy more than anyone. He leaned against the rail, staring at the dark water as if it were a mirror reflecting his own dread. His thoughts circled endlessly, returning to the same truth. The creature was not a beast to be slain but a presence to be endured, perhaps even understood. He had spent his life listening to the ocean's hidden language, translating echoes into landscapes and silence into meaning. Now, for the first time, he believed the abyss might be listening back. Yet convincing Henrik of this was as impossible as silencing the storm itself. Marek Kovac shuffled over, his usual swagger gone, replaced by a heaviness that bent his shoulders. He lit a cigarette with shaking hands, inhaled deeply, and exhaled smoke into the salt air. "Tell me you have a plan, Vargon," he muttered. Elias said nothing for a moment, his eyes fixed on the fjord, then finally replied, "Not to kill it. To speak to it." Marek barked a laugh that held no humor. "You want to chat with the devil that just sank half the fleet? You're mad." Elias turned toward him, his voice low but certain. "Madness is believing we can kill what the sea itself protects." The command deck erupted in tension. He spoke of reversing the sonar arrays, not as weapons but as a signal, a pulse designed to echo the creature's own rhythm, the heartbeat he had heard from the depths. "It is not random," he insisted. "It is deliberate. Communication. If we respond in kind, perhaps it will hear us. Perhaps it will stand down." Henrik's face hardened into stone. "And if you are wrong? If it rises again stronger?" Elias met his gaze without flinching. "Then we die anyway. But if we fight, we die faster." The silence that followed was unbearable. For the first time, Henrik did not have a swift retort. His authority wavered, tested by a truth he could not admit but could not deny. The final plan emerged from compromise and desperation. The fleet would prepare explosives to collapse the trench, sealing the creature beneath layers of stone and sediment. Elias would attempt his experiment, transmitting a signal that might calm or distract the Kraken long enough to succeed. Henrik called it folly, yet allowed it. Their faith in steel unraveling, their hope tethered to the strange conviction of a scientist haunted by the abyss. When the moment came, Elias entered the mini-sub, its cockpit cramped and stinking of oil. Arjun's absence weighed on him. The young engineer would have been the one to fine-tune the frequencies, but now Elias carried that burden alone. Marek leaned through the hatch before sealing it, his voice uncharacteristically solemn. "Don't let that thing sing you to death." Elias allowed himself a faint smile, one that carried no joy but gratitude. Then the hatch sealed, and he descended into darkness. The water pressed against the sub with crushing weight. Sonar pulses rippled outward, each one a careful mimicry of the deep heartbeat Elias had recorded. He adjusted dials, sweat dripping down his temple as he listened for the response. For long, suffocating moments there was nothing. Then it came, a tremor low and resonant, vibrating through the hull like the breath of some immense and unseen god. The Kraken had heard him. The rhythm matched his, pulse for pulse, as though acknowledging the attempt. Elias's chest tightened with awe. It was not mindless. It was listening. The timer armed, his men awaiting his word. Every second stretched taut with the fear that the creature would rise again. Marek hovered nearby, torn between loyalty to command and the strange hope Elias inspired. When another surge of waves rocked the fleet, Henrik snarled, "Enough!" and reached for the switch. Marek's hand clamped down over his, defiance blazing in his eyes. "Give him time. Just this once, give him time." Henrik hesitated, fury contorting his face, but something in Marek's voice, the desperation, the uncharacteristic plea, stayed his hand. For the first time, Henrik relinquished control, if only for a breath. Below, Elias pushed the system to its limits, the frequencies resonating until the cabin shuddered. The Kraken appeared in the sonar feed, a mass so vast it filled the display, its movements slow, deliberate. The eye emerged once more, peering through the murk, locking onto the sub. Elias's breath caught. He pulsed the signal again, softer, slower, like an echo of understanding. The creature paused, tentacles drifting in the currents, as if weighing this fragile gesture. In that silence Elias felt something impossible. Recognition. But the moment shattered as Henrik, unable to restrain himself longer, slammed the detonator. Explosions rippled through the trench, thunder rolling upward as stone collapsed into the abyss. The Kraken convulsed, a roar of vibration tearing through the water. Elias's sub was hurled sideways, alarms shrieking as pressure threatened to crush the hull. For a heartbeat he thought it was over, that the ocean would claim him as it had claimed his brother. Then the creature sank, vanishing beneath the avalanche of stone, the water boiling with its fury before settling into eerie calm. Elias awoke to Marek pulling him from the battered sub. His lungs burning, ears ringing. On deck chaos reigned. The trench had collapsed, burying the Kraken, or at least part of it. Men cheered half-heartedly, relief tainted by dread. Henrik, bloodied from debris, leaned against the railing, his voice hoarse. "We sealed it. That's enough." Yet even as he spoke, he knew it was not. His gaze lingered on Elias, and for once there was no contempt, only weary acknowledgement. "You were right," he admitted, the words tasting foreign. "We were never conquerors here." Moments later, his body sagged, his wounds too deep, and he died with the sea wind in his hair, a soldier who had finally glimpsed his limits. The aftermath settled with heavy silence. The fjord lay quiet, the waters deceptively calm. Files were stamped classified, the coastline sealed off, the official story written in ink that denied the truth. Yet Elias knew the truth was not so easily buried. Days later, in a secluded monitoring station, he returned to the sonar. At first there was nothing, only static and the hum of machines. Then, faintly, a rhythm emerged. Slower, distant but alive. The heartbeat pulsed once more, echoing from beneath the rubble. The Kraken had survived. Elias leaned back, exhaustion in his bones, but his eyes alight with grim certainty. Humanity had not destroyed the abyss. They had only reminded it that mankind was here. Fragile, arrogant, desperate, and still capable of speaking, even if in whispers. As the heartbeat faded into silence, Elias closed his eyes and murmured to himself, "It heard us. And it will not forget." The order came at dawn, delivered with the blunt certainty of military authority. Depth charges would be deployed along the fjord's trench to flush the anomaly upward, where the fleet could surround and destroy it. Commander Henrik Alstad stood on the command deck as he relayed the plan, his voice sharp against the steady rumble of engines. To him, hesitation was weakness, and weakness meant death. Elias Vargon listened from the edge of the room, arms crossed, fury smoldering behind his calm expression. He knew this was not a creature to be provoked. Science had warned them, instinct had screamed at them, yet Henrik's stubbornness left no space for doubt. The men would obey, and the sea would answer in kind. Marek Kovac strapped on his gear with a grim smile that lacked its usual bravado. "If we're going fishing, let's hope the catch doesn't swallow the boat," he muttered, though no one laughed. Even his fatalistic humor had grown brittle, like a mask about to crack. Arjun Rao remained in the control room, fingers trembling as he adjusted sonar frequencies. His readings painted a picture no one wanted to accept. A mass moving through the trench larger than any whale pod, larger than any submarine ever constructed. "It's aware of us," he whispered to Elias as he passed by, voice barely audible. "It's waiting." Elias said nothing, but their eyes met in unspoken agreement. The first charges detonated in the depths, sending thunder through the water. Waves rose and slammed against the hulls of nearby ships. For a moment silence followed, heavy and unnatural. Then the ocean convulsed. A column of water erupted skyward, and from it emerged a tentacle thicker than a tree trunk, lined with suckers that clamped down upon a destroyer's hull. Metal screeched like tortured bone as the ship was dragged toward the trench. Men shouted, alarms blared, and the sky filled with the acrid stench of burning fuel. The Kraken had risen. Elias stood frozen on deck, awe and terror mingling in his veins. He had imagined shadows, hinted outlines, but nothing prepared him for the reality of it. The creature's body stretched beyond vision, its vast form rolling beneath the waves. An eye surfaced for a heartbeat, black, immense, reflecting a flicker of intelligence that pierced him to the core. It was not an animal. It was something older, something that had witnessed epochs pass while mankind crawled from the mud. And now it gazed upon them with the indifference of a god disturbed in its temple. Henrik roared for counterattack. Torpedoes streaked into the water, missiles arced overhead, depth charges plunged once more. Explosions lit the fjord, but the Kraken seemed to absorb them, as though fire and steel were no more than raindrops against its skin. With deliberate precision, it coiled around a frigate and wrenched it sideways, slamming it into another vessel. The collision sent fire blooming across the waves. Men hurled themselves into the sea, their screams cut short as currents pulled them under. The fleet, a wall of human confidence, was reduced to splinters in minutes. Arjun's voice crackled through the comms, desperate and broken. "It's shutting us down. The systems. It's jamming us." Screens went black, communication lines failed, and navigation spiraled into chaos. It wasn't random destruction. The Kraken targeted technology, severing the lifelines of the fleet as though it understood them. Elias's stomach clenched. This was no blind monster thrashing in instinctive rage. It was retaliating, choosing its strikes with terrible clarity. Merrick stumbled onto the deck beside Elias, his face pale beneath layers of salt and soot. "Tell me I'm wrong," he shouted, his voice cracking. "But it doesn't want us dead. Not yet. It wants us to know we don't belong here." Elias could only nod. His heart thundered, not just with fear but with a realization that cut deeper than steel. Humanity had always seen itself as conqueror of the natural world, master of ocean and sky. Yet here was proof they were intruders, fragile and insignificant, tolerated only until the abyss chose otherwise. Henrik, undeterred even as ships crumbled around him, turned his wrath upon Elias. "You knew," he shouted, seizing him by the collar. "You knew and you said nothing useful. Tell me how to kill it." Elias tore free, his voice raw with desperation. "You can't kill it. Every strike makes it stronger. Every detonation wakes it further. You don't fight the ocean, you endure it." Henrik's eyes blazed with defiance, the fury of a man who would rather burn than bow. "Then endure is exactly what we will not do. We will fight until it bleeds." The argument was cut short as the Kraken rose higher, breaking the surface with a body that blotted out the horizon. Tentacles lashed across the decks, ripping equipment free and hurling it into the sea. The creature's roar was not sound but vibration, a resonance that rattled bones and cracked glass. Men fell to their knees, clutching ears, some bleeding from ruptured drums. Elias staggered, his scientist's mind reeling at the sheer force of its presence. This was not merely biological power. It was elemental, the raw will of the abyss given form. In the chaos, Arjun's final transmission broke through, his voice faint but resolute. "It's not fighting us, it's silencing us. Knows we are loud. Knows we are arrogant. And it will not let us leave. The line cut abruptly, replaced by static, and Elias knew with certainty that Arjun had been lost, swallowed by the very systems he had trusted his life to. The loss was another fracture in their already splintered resolve. The fleet retreated in fragments, ships limping away under Henrik's furious commands. Smoke trailed into the grey sky, and the fjord stank of fuel and ash. The Kraken did not pursue. It sank back into the depths, its massive form sliding beneath the waves until only ripples remained. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the destruction. It was deliberate, as though the creature had chosen to let them live, a warning rather than an execution. Elias stood at the railing long after the chaos subsided, his gaze locked on the dark water. The memory of the eye haunted him, not with fear but with recognition. In that brief moment of contact, he had felt something, an awareness that pierced the veil between species. The Kraken had looked at him as though it understood him, as though it remembered him. He whispered to himself, unheard by the others, "It knows me." When Henrik approached, blood on his temple and rage in his eyes, Elias expected another confrontation. Instead, the commander's voice was quieter, almost shaken. "We regroup. We rearm. And next time we end this." Elias did not answer. His heart told him there would be no ending, only continuation, an endless struggle between man's arrogance and nature's vast indifference. As the ship limped away from the fjord, he felt the creature's presence lingering like a storm on the horizon. It had been awakened, and it would not return to slumber easily. The heartbeat echoed in his memory, steady, patient, and ominous. The battle was far from finished. The vessel lingered in the fjord like an intruder overstaying its welcome. Salt spray coated its rails, and the men aboard carried the unease of soldiers waiting for an enemy they could not name. Reports of silence from a patrol submarine hung over the crew like a funeral bell, though Commander Henrik Ulstad insisted it was a malfunction. He barked orders with his usual iron precision, yet even he walked with a heaviness, as though the water itself had eyes trained upon him. Elias Vargon knew better than to press the point directly, but every glance at the sonar console tightened the knot in his chest. The anomaly was still there, moving, never straying far from the fjord's mouth. It followed them as a wolf follows sheep. Arjun Rao worked longer hours in the control room, his normally steady hands trembling each time the machine spat back irregular readings. His voice was measured when he spoke, but beneath the surface lived the fear of a man watching logic unravel. He confided in Elias once, late at night, when the rest of the crew slept. "It's not just sound," he said, gesturing to the shifting waves of data on his screen. "It reacts. It learns the frequencies we use, then changes. No algorithm does that." Elias agreed but kept his words low. Henrik would call it insubordination if such talk spread. Still, the seed was planted, and among the crew whispers grew like rot. Marek Kovac alone seemed to embrace the tension. He smoked on deck despite the warnings, grinning with a recklessness that unsettled the others. Yet his jokes no longer carried their former weight. He laughed louder, spoke more crudely, as though volume alone might drown the dread swelling beneath their feet. When no one responded, he fell silent, and that silence spoke volumes. Even Marek's bravado had limits. One morning, under a sky bruised purple by storm clouds, the men lowered a submersible drone into the depths. Its camera cut through the murk, revealing landscapes few human eyes had seen, cliffs plunging downward, caves yawning like mouths, ridges marked with unnatural symmetry. Elias stared at the images with a scientist's hunger, but also with a pilgrim's awe. Carvings, too deliberate to be natural, stretched across stone as though some ancient hand had etched them. Spirals, interlocking arcs, symbols without translation. Arjun muttered that they might be remnants of a forgotten people, long before Norsemen ruled these waters. Henrik dismissed it as rock erosion, his voice sharp, his authority unyielding. But the marks did not look like erosion, and Elias could not ignore the thought that the creature was not simply animal but woven into a story older than mankind's memory. The drone descended further, its lights cutting into darkness until the signal began to flicker. Static crept across the screen. Then, just as Arjun adjusted the feed, a shape passed in front of the camera. Smooth, vast, and too close to comprehend. The screen dissolved into black. The cable snapped. The drone was gone. The silence that followed carried the weight of something watching them from below. Henrik ordered immediate retrieval procedures, but Elias saw the truth in the crew's eyes. They had not lost a machine. They had been warned. The first open strike came days later. A submarine sent to patrol the fjord ceased all communication. 4 hours, Henrik insisted it was a systems failure. Yet when emergency transmissions finally burst through, they were filled with screams and the deafening groan of steel under impossible pressure. The feed cut in and out, the last image flashing across the monitors. A wall of flesh, gray and ridged, pressing against the camera, and then the violent snap of metal crushed like tin. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. Men on deck exchanged glances that spoke of nightmares made real. Henrik swore the footage would remain classified. To the world, the vessel would be listed as lost in storm conditions. Elias refused to let the lie stand, though he lacked the authority to challenge it openly. He confronted Henrik in private, voice taut with fury. "This is no enemy nation. This is no machine. You are leading these men to their graves." Henrik's jaw tightened, his composure unshaken, but a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. He answered with the conviction of a commander clinging to order. "If it bleeds, it can be fought. And if it threatens my country, it will be destroyed." Elias did not respond, but deep down he knew this was not an enemy that could be measured in blood. That night, Merrick joined Elias on deck. His face stripped of bravado. The wind howled and rain swept against them, yet Marek's voice carried through the storm. "Do you think it killed your brother's sub?" Elias froze, caught off guard. He had never spoken of that suspicion aloud. Marek's tone carried no mockery, only grim honesty. "If it's the same thing, then we've been living on borrowed time. Maybe this fjord isn't ours. Maybe it never was." His words echoed the unease Elias had long felt but rarely voiced. For the first time, Marek's laughter had vanished entirely, and that absence was more frightening than the creature itself. The days dragged like centuries. The sea grew angrier, currents shifting without reason, storms rising faster than weather charts predicted. Villagers packed their belongings and fled in silence, as though guided by some ancestral instinct humans had long buried. The few who remained muttered about omens, about old stories of the sea demanding tribute. Henrik dismissed them, but even he could not ignore the emptying coastline, the abandoned boats rocking gently in the tide. On the 5th night, the crew gathered on deck, drawn by a commotion at sea. The water heaved unnaturally, not from wind, but from something stirring below. Then, without warning, the surface bulged upward. For a moment it seemed the ocean itself tried to stand. Shadows writhed beneath the waves, colossal and formless, yet unmistakably alive. A hush fell over the men. Even Henrik, unflinching in every crisis, went still. They could see it now, not fully, never fully, but enough to understand the scale. The fjord held not just a predator, but a god of the abyss, and it had awoken. Elias's breath caught as he stared into the dark expanse. The sonar echo returned to him, the deep, rhythmic heartbeat that had haunted his nights. Only now it wasn't distant. It was here, beneath them, rising like judgment. He whispered to himself words no one else could hear. "It's listening." And in that instant he knew their time was running out, that the ocean's patience was thinning. The crew retreated below decks, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Some spoke of abandoning the mission, of retreating before it was too late. Henrik silenced them with orders, but even his authority trembled under the weight of what they had seen. Elias, lying awake in his cabin, knew the true conflict had shifted. No longer was it about military control or scientific discovery. It was survival itself. Humanity had stirred something vast, something ancient, And now it was awake. The heartbeat would not stop. It would only grow louder. The sea was iron-gray that morning, the kind of color that swallowed light rather than reflected it. Wind howled against the steel hull of the research vessel, and waves rose like the shoulders of some ancient beast stirring beneath the surface. Dr. Elias Vargon stood at the railing, his weather-worn face turned toward the horizon, where the fjord narrowed into a jagged throat. He had been on the ocean most of his life, but the waters of Vangsans felt different, too still when they should have been restless, too restless when they should have been calm. Years of studying sound, mapping invisible landscapes with sonar, had taught him that silence itself could be a warning. And lately, the silence here had teeth. Elias was not a man of easy laughter. At 42, he carried his grief like an invisible anchor, heavy but unyielding. A submarine accident had taken his younger brother years ago, an event he had never spoken of outside official reports. That loss was why he had buried himself in the language of the deep, turning absence into vocation. He had believed science might grant him clarity where tragedy had only left questions. Yet now, standing above waters that swallowed entire villages in whispers and left dead fish floating to the surface without explanation, he felt that same childhood dread crawling along his spine. Something was down there, and it was not a geological anomaly. The naval presence confirmed it. Commander Henrik Ulstad strode across the deck with the self-assurance of a man born into authority. Square-jawed, broad-shouldered, he wore his uniform like armor and his orders like scripture. He distrusted scientists, especially ones like Elias who argued too much and saluted too little. To Henrik, problems were enemies waiting to be subdued. To Elias, they were puzzles demanding understanding. Their philosophies clashed with every briefing, every sonar reading. Yet Henrik respected results, and Elias delivered them with unnerving precision. Behind them, Marek Kovac leaned casually against a crate of equipment, cigarette dangling from his lips, though regulations forbade it. Marek had the swagger of a man who had cheated death too many times to fear it. A diver by trade, he spoke of drowning as though it were an old drinking buddy, half in jest, half in fatalistic truth. The ocean, he often said, is patient. She waits for all of us. His humor, rough-edged but strangely comforting, eased the tension when storms pounded the vessel and orders tightened like chains. Still, even Marek had gone quiet in recent days, his laughter dying each time the sonar returned with readings that defied reason. Then there was Arjun Rao, bent over his terminal in the control room, eyes reflecting the green glow of screens. Methodical, quiet, often overlooked. He was the system's heartbeat. He trusted numbers more than men and machines more than their operators, but he carried within him a cautious morality the others lacked. It was Arjun who first pointed out that the readings did not merely bounce off the seabed but changed, as though an intelligence were replying. When Elias pressed the point during a tense meeting, Henrik dismissed it as technical error, yet his tightened jaw betrayed unease. The chain of command demanded silence, but fear had already begun to spread like frost across steel. The conflict deepened one night when a school of fish surfaced belly up, stretching for half a mile like a silver graveyard. No nets, no pollutants, no storms had killed them, only something unseen. Villagers whispered of drowned teenagers pulled from shallow waters with expressions of terror frozen on their faces. Official reports spoke of accidents and reckless swimming, but Elias saw the patterns. Sudden shifts in current, localized tremors, sonar interference. Nature was speaking and humanity refused to listen. Late in the evening, as rain hammered the decks and Marek cursed the weather, Elias huddled over the sonar console. He adjusted frequencies, narrowing the signal, until the machine sang back in echoes. At first it was ordinary, the scatter of rocks and ridges. Then, abruptly, the sound returned in rhythm, a slow, deliberate thrum. Not random. Not natural. He froze, heart pounding, as the pattern resolved itself into something unmistakable. A heartbeat, impossibly vast, reverberating through water dense enough to muffle thunder. Arjun leaned closer, eyes wide, whispering, "It's alive." Henrik entered moments later, the echo still pulsing through the speakers. He listened, jaw rigid, before snapping the machine off with a single decisive motion. "This does not leave this room," he said, his voice low but edged like steel. "What you heard was nothing more than geological resonance. Write it as such." His gaze locked on Elias, daring him to object. Elias did, quietly but firmly. "That was no rock. Something answered us." The silence afterward carried more weight than words. Marek's smirk was gone. Arjun's hands trembled over the console. And Henrik, though unflinching, could not disguise the faintest flicker of doubt in his eyes. The days that followed pressed upon them with unnatural heaviness. Instruments faltered, navigation signals scrambled, and even the most seasoned sailors confessed unease. At night, shadows seemed to rise just beneath the surface, fleeting shapes too large to belong to whales or drifting debris. Elias slept little, his mind circling the possibilities, his brother's fate bleeding into every thought. If what they had heard was truly a creature, it had been here long before mankind learned to sail. To awaken it now with sonar and explosives was not merely arrogance, it was provocation. One evening, Elias stood alone on deck, the fjord stretching black and endless around him. The storm had cleared, leaving only the quiet hum of the ship's generators. He leaned over the railing, staring into the abyss, when the water shifted. It was subtle at first, a ripple against the current, then a swelling, as though something vast rolled just beneath the skin of the sea. He gripped the railing, eyes straining, and for the briefest instant he saw it, a shadow moving against deeper darkness, immense and deliberate. His breath caught, his chest tightening with equal parts terror and awe. Whatever it was watching. By the time the others joined him, the sea was calm again, placid as glass. Henrik dismissed his sighting with a shake of the head, ordering everyone back to duty. Yet as Elias walked away, he could not shake the feeling that the ocean had whispered back, acknowledging him, marking him. In the silence of his cabin later that night, the sonar echo replayed itself in his memory, the deep, slow heartbeat of something alive, ancient and waiting. He knew then that the real conflict was no longer between men on this ship, but between humanity and the abyss beneath them. And he felt, with dreadful certainty, that the abyss had already chosen to respond.